Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, Louisiana becomes the first state to require the Ten Commandments be displayed in every public school classroom. We take a closer look at the implications.
We have so many religious differences, and yet we have managed to negotiate them, live together, peaceful coexistence, mainly because we've kept the government out of the religion business.
Divisions between Israel's military and political leadership, and a diplomatic spat with the U.S. lay bare rifts over the war in Gaza. And how Republican disinformation is sowing doubts about the legitimacy of the 2024 election.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Russian President Vladimir Putin picked up more support today during his trip to Asia, signing a series of deals with Vietnam. But his visit to the region is as much about the war in Ukraine as it is about bilateral agreements. Earlier this week, Putin was in North Korea, where he and Kim Jong-un pledged to come to each other's aid. That led South Korea to say it would consider supplying arms to Ukraine. Putin told reporters in Vietnam today that the country's leaders would be making a big mistake if they did so. Meantime, in Washington, Senate Republicans and Democrats banded together in pushing to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism.
In my view, this message to the world is as important in a moral sense as any practical consequence. Russia deserves to be in this small, selective club of atrocity-committing killers.
Also today, the White House said it would redirect deliveries of air defense missiles to Ukraine instead of sending them to other U.S. allies. A spokesperson described the decision as, quote, difficult but necessary given Russia's ongoing attacks on Ukraine. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is all but certain to be the next NATO Secretary General after his last rival for the job, Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, withdrew from the race. Rutte would succeed current NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg in October. He's a longtime supporter of Ukraine's war effort against Russia. Rutte's selection would allow NATO leaders to put up a united front when they gather in Washington in July to mark the 75th anniversary of the military alliance. The trial of a Russian-American woman accused of treason started today in Moscow. Ksenia Karelina was born in Russia but lives in Los Angeles. She was arrested in February while visiting family in Russia. Russian authorities accuse her of raising money for Ukraine, but her boyfriend says it was a single donation of about $50. In a statement, he told the NewsHour, she is full of compassion and donated a small amount to a U.S. nonprofit to help people in need. She is not an activist for any cause. Karelina faces up to 20 years if convicted. Today, a State Department spokesperson warned all Americans to avoid going to Russia.
You run a tremendous risk by traveling to Russia of being detained, being imprisoned, being convicted. And so we continue to make clear to every American, do not, for any reason, travel to Russia.
Carolina's trial is taking place behind closed doors in the same court where Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich will face espionage charges when his trial starts next week. Tropical storm Alberto was downgraded to a tropical depression today as the first named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season made its way inland over Mexico. Alberto brought heavy rain and sustained winds of 35 miles per hour. 3 people have died. Parts of southern Texas were also hard hit. Rain is also in the forecast in New Mexico, where 2 massive wildfires have burned more than 35 square miles and destroyed 1,400 buildings. At least 2 people there have died. Residents are hoping the rain will help the firefighting efforts, which have been unrelenting.
It's been nonstop planes, nonstop sirens. It almost felt like being in the middle of a war zone with all the smoke surrounding our little calm area right here in the middle.
Meantime, the eastern Great Lakes and New England baked today under this week's unrelenting heat wave. The Mid-Atlantic and Ohio Valley are next. The National Weather Service expects heat index readings to surpass 100 degrees in many areas, possibly setting new records. Crew members from the cargo ship that crashed into Baltimore's Key Bridge in March will finally be allowed to return to their home countries of India and Sri Lanka. Attorneys for the city of Baltimore had said they should stay in the U.S. to be deposed in ongoing civil litigation. But a U.S. district judge confirmed they can go home so long as they are still available for depositions. The crew members had stayed on the Dali for weeks after the deadly collision, even when the experts carried out a controlled demolition of the bridge to free the vessel. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced new sanctions today against 8 members of a Mexican drug cartel as part of the Biden administration's broader push to address the ongoing opioid crisis. The group is notorious for manufacturing and distributing fentanyl, as well as other illegal drugs. Speaking in Georgia today, Yellen said the Treasury Department is treating the cartel like it would a business, freezing its members' assets and cutting them off financially.
They rely on access to banking systems and to the U.S. dollar to make payroll and finance purchases. And this means the Treasury Department has a unique ability to disrupt and degrade their operations.
At that same appearance, Secretary Yellen defended President Biden's tariffs on Chinese goods, including electric vehicles and semiconductors, and she criticized former President Trump's tariff proposals as being too broad, saying they would hurt American consumers and businesses. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average added nearly 300 points to close above 39,000. The Nasdaq slipped from its recent records, giving back 140 points. The S&P 500 gave back nearly 14 points. And actor Donald Sutherland has died. Jeffrey Brown has more on the career of one of the industry's most versatile actors.
Donald Sutherland's career spanned 6 decades, with appearances in nearly 200 films and TV shows, and the widest possible range of characters.
I'd rather be a civilian, sir.
He first made his name in the 1960s playing an Army misfit in The Dirty Dozen.
I think you will find these accommodating. They're quite dry.
In the 70s, he broke through as a leading man, as a wisecracking battlefield surgeon in Robert Altman's film MASH. He could also be twisted and menacing, as in Fellini's Casanova, or a murderous Nazi spy in Eye of the Needle. A seminal role, the emotionally wounded father in Robert Redford's 1980 film Ordinary People. One of Hollywood's most prolific actors, Sutherland maintained a constant presence on screen and never retired, taking on more supporting character roles as time went on.
For you, Miss Everdeen.
Among the best known as President Snow in the popular film series The Hunger Games. Despite his critical acclaim and popularity, Sutherland never received an Academy Award nomination. But he said the privilege of working with acclaimed filmmakers was enough of a reward.
I've made films for Fellini and for Bertolucci, for Chabrol, for Werner Herzog, for Rebecca Horn. These people I love. And that love is the greatest award you could ever have in your life.
And in 2017, at age 82, he received an honorary Oscar for Lifetime Achievement.
I wish I could say thank you to all of the characters that I've played. Thank them for using their lives to inform my life.
Sutherland's death was announced on social media by his son and fellow actor, Kiefer. who wrote of his father, "Never daunted by a role, good, bad, or ugly. He loved what he did and did what he loved." Donald Sutherland was 88 years old. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
Still to come on the NewsHour, a community in New Mexico offers a unique model of how to live off the grid and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How some Scotch whiskey producers are aiming to go carbon neutral. And new book recommendations to add to your summer reading list.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Louisiana will now require the Ten Commandments to be displayed in every public school classroom, the only state in the country to do so. The state's Republican Governor Jeff Landry signed the bill into law yesterday.
This bill mandates the display of the Ten Commandments in every classroom in public, elementary, secondary, and post-education schools in the state of Louisiana. Because if you want to respect the rule of law, you got to start from the original lawgiver, which was Moses. Amen.
Under the law, the posters must be no smaller than 11 by 14 inches, and the commandments must be the central focus of the poster and in a large, easily readable font. They would be paid for through private donations, not state funds. It comes as similar bills have been proposed in Texas, Oklahoma, and Utah. All of this raising questions about the constitutional separation of church and state, with civil liberty groups pledging to sue. We're joined now by Charles Haynes, Senior Fellow for Religious Liberty at the Freedom Forum. That's a nonpartisan foundation promoting First Amendment freedoms. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Good to hear.
So Governor Landry said he cannot wait to be sued. Does he have reason to feel confident given the changing composition of the court?
He's confident he will be sued. That's that. He can be sure of that. Well, yes, because this is a climate in which the Supreme Court has moved the Establishment Clause and the interpretation considerably, and I would say lowered the wall of separation, if you want to use that metaphor, till there's almost nothing left. So they think this is our time. We can get things through.
Well, legal battles over the Ten Commandments in classrooms are not new, as you well know.
Right.
In 1980, the Supreme Court ruled that a similar law in Kentucky was unconstitutional. Does Louisiana's rationale, does Louisiana's approach change anything in the eyes of federal judges on this?
I don't think so, but they do. And so they are betting that the last big case, Van Orden v. Perry in 2005, when the Supreme Court upheld a monument, Ten Commandments monument, in the State House Park, they think, well, that reasoning gives us support for putting it up in every classroom. I don't see how they're going to make that case. It's a very different kind of case. And in fact, on the same day in 2005, the Supreme Court struck down 2 Kentucky courthouse displays of the Ten Commandments, saying that they promoted religion. So I think the court would be, in ordinary times, more likely to go with the Kentucky decision. But they don't think so.
As we mentioned, there's similar legislation that pertains to the Ten Commandments. They've been proposed in Texas, Oklahoma, Utah. They haven't been successful yet. Could this change how these other states proceed, especially as the religious right steps up its effort to amplify expressions of faith in the public square?
I think those other states are going to wait and see how it fares in the courts. If it's struck down in the lower courts and it doesn't go far, or if it gets to the Supreme Court and they strike it down, then it'll stop this movement. On the other hand, if it makes it to the Supreme Court and the court changes the rules of the Establishment Clause, which it could, it's already done that recently. It's allowing more government aid to go to religious institutions, for example, which used to be, unthinkable. So who knows? If the Establishment Clause is erased, pretty much, then governments can promote religion and say that it's history or for whatever reason. So, and I think that's going to be very, very difficult for the future of the United States.
The groups that are opposed to this, what's their argument and how much precedent do they have on their side?
They have a lot of precedent because the court has always been very careful to require neutrality by the government in a public school. impressionable young people, a captive audience. The government can't take sides in religion or impose religion on young kids. And that side says the Establishment Clause is why we have peace in this country. We have so many religious differences, and yet we have managed to negotiate them, live together, peaceful coexistence, mainly because we've kept the government out of the religion business. And what happens when the government has the power, like they're asking in Louisiana, to promote a religious message in every classroom? They call it a history message. But the Ten Commandments is, as the court said in 1980, read it. It's definitely a religious message.
One of the co-sponsors of the legislation said that the Ten Commandments, in her view, she views it as a historical document, and she says this might not work in California or New York, but in Louisiana, it does.
Well, it's popular, but the First Amendment isn't a popularity contest. It's meant to protect the conscience of every individual. And if there are only 10 people in Louisiana who don't want the Ten Commandments promoted, they have a right under the First Amendment to make their case. I think they might win still. Even a conservative court is going to think long and hard about wiping away barriers to government promoting religion to young kids. I mean, that just seems unthinkable. But the court changed how they interpret the Establishment Clause. It used to be neutrality in public schools under the Establishment Clause by government. Now it's history and tradition. We're not sure what they're going to do with that. If they say, well, yes, it's our historical tradition that we have the Ten Commandments and so forth, and the legislatures in Louisiana are betting that this court will say, yeah, we've taught about the Ten Commandments all these years, and so why not put it on the wall?
Charles Haynes is a senior fellow for religious liberty at the Freedom Forum. Thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated criticism the Biden administration calls untrue and unfair, that the U.S. has withheld weapons Israel needs to fight the war in Gaza. The diplomatic spat between the Prime Minister and the Biden White House comes as simmering tensions between Netanyahu and his own military boiled over. Nick Schifrin is here with more. Nick?
For months, even years, military officials in Israel have often disagreed with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But most military criticism of Israel's longest-serving leader is made anonymously or after retirement. This week, though, Israel's Defense Forces top spokesman made public the military's concerns about Netanyahu's repeated claim of total victory over Hamas.
The political echelon has to decide, and the Israel Defense Forces will implement. But this business of destroying Hamas, making Hamas disappear, it's simply throwing sand in the eyes of the public. If we don't bring something else to Gaza, then at the end of the day, we will get Hamas.
So how significant is this public criticism by the military of the Prime Minister? And how does it play into the diplomatic tensions between Netanyahu and the Biden administration? For answers to that, we turn to Laura Blumenfeld, a former senior policy advisor on the State Department's Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team and currently a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Laura Blumenfeld, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. So, how significant is this public military criticism of the Prime Minister?
I think it's very significant. I think the IDF recognizes while they may be winning militarily, they're losing morally. And that has long-term strategic implications for Israel's security. This idea of indecision, I think what they're saying to the Prime Minister is take a position and defend it. The Prime Minister cannot be an undecided voter. We need you to support our ask for ultra-Orthodox fighters. Our forces are depleted. Number two, we have a political horizon that we're looking for that we can aim for militarily, and we don't want to occupy the Gaza Strip after the war. I remember spending time with the last military commander of Gaza before Israel withdrew, and he wore what I recall was the Gaza mask. It was this combination of dust, sweat, and the smell of regret. We rode around in a Jeep while kids were throwing stones at him, and he said, this is the most morally corrosive thing for our state and ultimately for our security.
For Netanyahu, this is not only about what is now a public spat with the military, it's also tensions within his coalition. And this week, he released a statement saying, quote, I demand that all coalition partners get a hold of themselves and rise to the importance of the hour, put aside every other consideration, put aside all extraneous interests, line up as one together behind our fighters. How fractious is this coalition, and how important are those tensions?
Well, look, he needs the coalition in order to exercise what he calls, the ceasefire deal, which is the most important priority right now for the Israeli public. And to get to that deal, he's going to have to keep his coalition together. There are sort of some behind the scenes assurances and winks from the United States that maybe Lapid and some of his opposition members will support him. But he's got to be able to pull this through for the Israeli public. That is the number one demand, and he's responding to it, or he's trying to.
The latest draft of the ceasefire proposal was made public by President Biden a few weeks ago. And so let's turn to U.S.-Israeli relations right now. And on Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu posted this video.
It's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel.
Withholding weapons and ammunition today. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, called that statement, quote, not accurate and deeply disappointing and vexing to us. U.S. officials insist that there is one and only one weapons transfer that they have frozen back in May of 3,500 unguided bombs. But Netanyahu released another statement in response to Kirby's statement, and he said today, quote, I am ready to suffer personal attacks provided Israel receives the ammunition it needs. So why would Netanyahu post that video, which U.S. officials insist they did not know about ahead of time? And how significant is this public rift?
Well, this is very significant, and the theories have been flying. Everything from maybe it's a fist bump to Trump because he's decided that Trump will be the next U.S. president, to he's come, completely unhinged. It's a kind of preamble to his delivery, his speech that he's planning on delivering to Congress, and he's coordinating with the Republicans who are lining up against Biden. But it sort of violates all the rules of kind of no daylight between Israel and the United States, and ultimately, undoes what was his key strength. I mean, if Biden, the U.S. president, has your back, why would you stick a knife in his?
We should say U.S. officials insist privately and publicly that they're still negotiating fine with the prime minister and his staff. Today, the National Security Advisor is meeting with his equivalent from Israel. But you mentioned former President Trump. Do you believe that Netanyahu is extending the war in order to either stay in power and or wait for a possible Trump presidency?
Well, it's interesting. I also wonder if he's waiting for a Trump presidency, and are the Saudis waiting as well? Because there's this grand prize of the normalization deal with Israel, and also a security pact with the United States. And you can see kind of America's allies or potential allies hedging as we get closer and closer to the election. That's why, unfortunately, the only person who's in a rush here, to kind of clinch the ceasefire and move forward to regional integration and economic prosperity seems to the United States. I mean, one thing I learned when I worked in the State Department is you can't want it more than the parties. They also have to have incentive.
And finally, in the time we have left, Laura Bloomfield, U.S. officials are very worried about an unintended conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, and they say unintended because they believe the leaders of Israel and Hezbollah actually do not want that war. But how high are the risks of war between Israel and Hezbollah right now?
Well, for the IDF, for the generals I've been talking to for years, this is the war they expected. In some ways, they think of the Gaza war as the warm-up, and the real war is the war to the north. Precision-guided missiles, in sort of PGMs, are, in one word, what has given them night sweats for years. And they're worried because, the war in Gaza is kind of a slog. The one in the north is more of survival, aimed at population centers, easily rearmed over the land from Iran. And so I think if they could have a mini winnable war, which is what they're looking for before July 24th, before the prime minister comes to address Congress, they would have the win that they've been looking for ever since October 7th. Ever since then, they've been trying to prove that they can be the strong Israel that everybody recognizes from the past, masters of the preemptive strike, rather than the catch-up battle that they've been struggling with ever since October 7th.
Laura Blumenfeld, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been more than 3 years since baseless claims about a rigged 2020 election inspired an attack on the U.S. Capitol, but the lies have not stopped. Laura Barone Lopez is here with more. Laura?
Thanks, Jeff. Before and after the 2020 election, Donald Trump repeatedly sowed doubt about the legitimacy of the U.S. election system. Now, less than 5 months to go before November, he's doing it again. Here he is in the swing state of Wisconsin this week.
The radical left Democrats rigged the presidential election in 2020, and we're not going to let them rig the presidential election in 2024. And every time, we're not going to let them do it.
And much like last time, the former president has help from right-wing media.
What is up the Dems' sleeve to drag that body back into the White House? What's the dog that's not barking? And then let's say by some weird, miraculous chance that we didn't see coming, given that Trump is ahead, has a 66% chance of winning, looks like he's going to get the electoral count, and Joe still wins. Well, then what do you do after you win? How do you convince anyone that's real? Have they even thought of that? Like, even the Dems behind the scenes better hope he doesn't win, because no one's going to believe it.
To separate fact from fiction, I'm joined by David Becker, Executive Director of the Nonpartisan Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, thanks so much for joining us. Those two examples were just from recent days. The Fox News host Greg Gutfeld repeated his claim, saying that if President Biden wins in November, he'll only win if there are, quote, shenanigans, aka cheating. Debunk this for us.
Well, our elections, by every measure, are more secure, transparent, and verified than ever before. We know this because we have more paper ballots than ever before. Over 95% of all voters in the United States are going to vote on verifiable paper ballots this fall, and that's the highest percentage ever. It was about 95% or so in 2020. Those ballots are audited. The machines are audited to make sure they were tabulated correctly. Our voter lists are more clean than ever before, and we have more litigation both before and after the election to confirm the results and the rules than ever before. Our elections are very, very good in the United States, so people should know and can know that we will know the winner, and that winner will be correct.
That spreading of disinformation by Republican politicians, Americans across social media, and right-wing media, is it worse this election cycle than previous cycles?
I think it's worse because of the cumulative effect that we've seen over about 4 years. Of course, we had disinformation in the 2020 election cycle, especially during the pandemic where people were isolated and alone, when people had strong opinions about the election. We saw record turnout, 20 million more ballots cast in 2020 than we had ever seen in any election before. There was a lot of disinformation spread, particularly after the election by former President Trump after he had lost. But that election in 2020 was the most scrutinized election in American history. Roughly, perhaps 20 to 30% of the American public still thinks that the most secure, transparent, and verified election we've ever had, there was something wrong with. And that potentially could be problematic for 2024 in the aftermath.
There's another big election conspiracy theory being spread by Republicans right now.
He's going to let everybody come in because you know what they're trying to do? They're trying to sign these people up and register them. They're not citizens. They're not allowed to do it. It's illegal as hell. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to use all of these people that are pouring into our country to vote. What other reason?
Trump isn't the only person saying this week in response to President Biden's action to streamline a pathway to citizenship for undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens. House Speaker Mike Johnson posted on X on June 18th, quote, "This is proof positive of the Democrats' plan to turn illegal aliens into voters." And Fox News hosts also claimed this week that 49 states are providing voter registration without showing proof of citizenship to undocumented migrants. What's the reality here?
The reality is that this is, again, a misstatement of what the law and the facts are here in the United States. First, it is against the law for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. It has been for decades. It's very clear. It comes with criminal penalties. Second, every single voter in the United States to register to vote in a federal election has to provide ID. Almost always a driver's license number. And thanks to Real ID and other things, go onto your driver's bureau's website and see what you need to bring. You need to bring proof of legal presence, which will either prove that you're a U.S. citizen or you're a non-citizen who's here legally in most cases, in which case you shouldn't be registered to vote when that ID is checked against the database, which it is. And we know this has been incredibly successful. We know that very, very few, if any, non-citizens ever actually vote. And we know this because states like Georgia, Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger did a complete audit of their voter list as recently as 2022, looked at all of those that he couldn't find proof of citizenship for in the database. It was only about 1,500 statewide out of millions of voters. And the total number of those individuals who had voted in previous elections was 0. This is incredibly successful we are in terms of keeping non-citizens from voting. Very, very few non-citizens vote.
0 non-citizens in Georgia.
In Georgia, in that one audit, yeah.
You work with Republican and Democratic election officials who administer elections and who oversee them. Is this disinformation directly impacting them?
Yes, their jobs are much, much harder now. They're having to face disinformation all the time. They are getting it in their offices. They're getting it at election meetings that are public. They're getting it through public records requests that are requesting duplicative things that are just sucking up their bandwidth. I've even heard from particularly Republican election officials that they're getting it in their communities, that when they go to the grocery store or to their children's school or even to their places of worship, they have people who are accusing them of engaged in a massive conspiracy with millions of people to overturn the will of the voters.
What are the 2 big disinformation waves that you think are coming this election cycle?
So I think those waves are really divided by the close of the polls on election night. We're going to see a wave before then that tries to influence voters, makes them think that voting is rigged or voting is hard, or that their particular polling place or method of voting might not be available to them, to get them to self-suppress, to not show up to vote even though they should still be able to vote. People should be very skeptical and only rely upon official sources of information, their official election office in their county or locality or state. And then after the polls close, I think it's very likely we're going to see a really dangerous wave of disinformation that makes us to believe that's really going to be focused on the losing candidate or the candidate that thinks he's losing and is designed to make his supporters feel as if the election has been stolen. This could lead to a lot of instability and chaos in the post-election period of time and potentially violence like we saw on January 6th.
David Becker, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laura.
This summer's extreme heat and the demand for air conditioning are putting a big strain on the electricity grid in many parts of the country. But for more than 40 years, a pioneering architect in New Mexico has been building a unique kind of home that can be heated and cooled without using any electricity at all. Special correspondent Megan Thompson reports.
Natural bridges.
5 years ago, empty nesters Jess and Brian Johnson decided to leave Colorado and move south to just outside Taos, New Mexico, a place they'd loved visiting and where their dollar could go further.
This is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2,000 square foot home.
They have an open living area, a fireplace, and a sauna with views of the Southern Rockies. But the more unique features are harder to see. The home is off the grid, meaning it's not connected to power, water, or sewer lines. Their water comes from snow and rain, electricity from the sun.
We're not crazy conservationists. You know, we take showers every day and run the dishwasher and the washing machine and everything. The only way we're radical really is that we don't pay utility bills.
The Johnsons' home is called an Earthship. There are around 200 in northern New Mexico.
These are the same drawings I made for the front face.
Michael Reynolds came up with the idea as a young architect.
Ever since college, I have looked at the world around me and been disturbed by it. There's no question.
In the early 70s, Reynolds was especially disturbed by the growing garbage problem in the U.S. before recycling was widespread.
So I started addressing it just for myself. Then people started relating to it and wanting me to do it for them.
Reynolds began experimenting with building off-grid homes partly from aluminum cans. He came up with a model that began to get attention.
I have 6 things that I've determined are necessary for human sustenance. It's comfortable shelter without use of fossil fuel, electricity, water, food, treatment of human waste, and treatment of garbage. Anywhere anybody lives, those 6 things must be addressed.
Reynolds started a company to build and sell his homes and to teach people how to build their own. Today, more than 200 students and interns come here each year to learn earthship building techniques, which have been incorporated in some 3,000 homes around the world.
When I came across this, it just made sense to me. On grouting this wall.
Deborah Binder manages construction for Mike Reynolds. She's also in the middle of building her own earthship.
So this is going to be filled with plants once it's done.
Recycled materials are still a key building component.
At least here in Taos, glass bottles don't get recycled anymore. And you use less cement by using them, and you end up with these really beautiful walls.
Earthship's side and back walls are made from about 1,000 old tires. 300 to 400 pounds of dirt are rammed by hand into each one. The tire walls are built into a mound of earth to create an extremely dense and insulating structure.
It's almost like if you're inside a cave. So caves usually stay at about 63, 65 degrees all year round. And so then it's a lot easier to cool or to warm up that space.
In the winter, Brian and Jess Johnson's home is warmed up by sunlight streaming in through the southern wall of windows. In the summer, a system of tubes and vents brings cooler air in from the back of the house.
You open that vent, the hot air rises and pulls cool air through the rest of the building as it goes out.
We'll maintain 70 to 73 degrees Fahrenheit, whether it's 110 degrees outside or negative 10 degrees outside.
The Johnsons' electricity comes from 14 solar panels. Brian says they've learned how to avoid draining the batteries.
We don't run our dishwasher and our washer and dryer at night, so there are little trade-offs like that, but it's never a going without. No. It's just going at the right time.
Right.
The main hallway that connects all the rooms doubles as a greenhouse where the Johnsons grow bananas, grapes, and figs. Back outside, the slanted metal roof also doubles as a water catchment system.
All the rain or snow that falls onto our roof gets collected in cisterns behind our home. We have about 8,000 gallons of storage.
The water is filtered and first flows to the sinks, showers, and laundry. Then it drains to the greenhouse to water the plants. From there, it flows to the toilets. Then finally, it's flushed outside to a septic system that waters another garden.
So 1, 2, 3, 4 uses for every drop of water in this house.
This outer greenhouse.
The Earthship's ingenuity, unusual designs, and downright quirkiness have made them a tourist attraction.
This is just one of 5 properties that Mike's developed.
You can rent one on Airbnb or buy a new 1,600 square foot 2-bedroom for $500,000. This larger model is $1.7 million. But building Earthships on a wide scale outside of a community like this is challenging. For one, they're so unconventional that obtaining building permits and financing can be difficult.
Unless you've got the time and the inclination on your own to do it, or can afford a tremendous amount of labor costs, it just doesn't make any sense.
Sustainable home builder Kim Shanahan is the former head of the Santa Fe Area Home Builders Association and was active with the nonprofit Green Builder Coalition. He says those tire walls are the biggest problem.
Each little step of the wall, it's a lot of labor. And that's simply not something that a production builder or even a small builder could ever imagine doing. And that's why it never really could be done at scale.
But Shanahan says Mike Reynolds' other ideas helped inspire an entire generation of green home builders.
Self-sustaining power and warmth and electricity through solar panels, roof water capture and reuse. This is the future. Not necessarily tires and walls, but all the other principles that Mike Reynolds has taught us about what a house can and should be.
I think we need to start rethinking our buildings.
Brian and Jess Johnson figure they're saving around $500 a month on utilities compared to what they were paying back in Colorado. But they say it's not all about the money.
Once you start looking at these homes differently than traditional construction in the country and in the world, these just make so much more sense.
It feels good to be part of that. You know, you're just a little bite, but you're part of something special, I think.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Megan Thompson outside Taos, New Mexico.
The UK became the first country with a major economy to set a deadline to become a carbon neutral economy. with zero emissions of greenhouse gases. Britain's target is 2050. Scotland's is even earlier, by 2045. As Fred de Sam Lazaro reports, one industry is already trying to clean up its act, one responsible for Scotland's best-known export.
Scotch whisky is a $7 billion a year export, reaching the farthest corners of the world, with scores of well-known brands from white label to black label.
Distilled and blended in Scotland.
The marketing, especially on more expensive labels, evokes the pristine Scottish countryside and its distinct whisky regions. Less well known is that whisky making is a dirty business, producing as much carbon dioxide as it does alcohol and using a lot of fossil fuels.
It is an energy-intensive process. This is our still house.
Anna Pilkington is an engineer at the Glen Tockers distillery in the Speyside region, owned by the French multinational Pernod Ricard, with brands like Chivas Regal and Glenlivet. Some 3,400 gallons of alcohol, equal to about 13,000 one-liter bottles, are distilled each day after the barley is mashed, washed, and then distilled in enormous copper stills before being poured into wooden barrels to be aged.
We have many different shapes of stills, and they will all produce a different character, because it all depends on how much time they have in contact with the copper.
So there's nothing better or worse, it's just a matter of individual preferences that you're trying to cater to?
Exactly. So we're in Speyside today, and Speyside are known for lighter, fruitier flavour profiles. However, if you were to go to Islay, they're known for their much heartier, fuller, richer spirits. And that's all to do with their malts, their water, and the shape of their stills.
The concern at this distillery goes beyond the whiskey palate to climate change and its potential impact on business, a concern shared by Scotland's government, which subsidised the installation of an elaborate system of pipes, condensers and compressors to capture and reuse much of the heat produced in the distillation.
We've seen a 48% reduction in overall energy consumption, but in terms of heat energy and therefore carbon, we've reduced it by 53%.
Has the equipment paid for itself yet?
Yes, yeah.
There are other plans capturing and bearing carbon dioxide, for example, to help reach net zero. It might seem like a no-brainer, but for many distilleries, such retrofits are not easy. Many are smaller, in old buildings on the historic register, and lack the physical space. And critically, they're loath to mess with a time-honored way of doing things.
People are very nervous about changing the way the process works. The water.
Ronald Dalmans is an executive with the distillery's parent company.
Because it's been done this way for sometimes hundreds of years.
Exactly, yeah. And especially if you're a smaller distiller, imagine if you only have 2 stills, 1 wash, 1 spirit. How do you do a trial in that scenario?
Big and small, he says, distillers are working with their competitors to reduce the carbon footprint of a very image-sensitive industry.
We're also needing to appeal to the consumers of tomorrow, and increasingly they are making decisions based on not just do I like the brand, but do I like what it stands for.
Making things that much trickier is that tomorrow is usually a long way off.
It takes just 3 ingredients to make whiskey: barley or a cereal grain, water, and yeast. The distillation takes a few days, and then the long wait begins before payday. In the case of this distillery, the stuff will remain in casks for 18 years before it's bottled and sent to the store shelf.
This distillery in the Scottish Highlands is a startup called Arbiki. Its start date was either 2013 or arguably about a couple of centuries earlier, says tour guide Mark Mash.
The distillery was in the field behind there in 1794. And so we pick up on that in our branding and our marketing.
That, the setting, and the storied history. The farm that surrounds the distillery's new incarnation is owned by a family with deep roots here. It will soon bring online a wind turbine, and unlike the multinationals with far-flung supply chains, everything is locally sourced.
All of our white spirits.
Today it sells and serves tourists vodka, gin, and a rye whiskey. Things that need less aging, all to keep the lights on until the big release in 2033 of its single malt whiskey.
We will always be able to tell you when this malt whiskey is bottled and sold that the crop that was distilled was Prisma barley and that it was grown in the Fawns Castle field up here.
And that's important for what reason?
I think it's an interest in the quality of what we eat and drink and therefore the provenance of what we do and what we make. It's very individual. People sometimes say to me, Mark, what's your favourite whiskey? My reply is always, ask me what mood I'm in.
He and the owners are counting on the right consumer mood 18 years after pouring their malt and a whole lot of faith into these casks. For the PBS NewsHour, in a very good mood, this is Fred de Sam Lazaro in the Scottish Highlands.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Whether you're on vacation at the beach or find yourself with a little more time for reading, summer is always a good time to pick up a new book. Jeffrey Brown gets recommendations now from two NewsHour regulars for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
And to talk about summer books and reading, I'm joined by Ann Patchett, author and owner of Parnassus Bookstore in Nashville, Tennessee, and Gilbert Cruz, he's the editor of the New York Times Book Review. Thanks both for joining us. Ann, you want to start with fiction?
Sure thing. I am very excited about Sandwich by Catherine Newman. If you want a book that has you from hello, this is the one. Family goes to the Cape every summer for 2 weeks. They have kids in their 20s. They have elderly parents, and they eat sandwiches. They are very near sandwich, and they are of the sandwich generation.
That's a real summer book, isn't it?
It is the ultimate summer book. And also, if you're feeling a little stressed, get a copy of Sipsworth by Simon Van Boy. This one has been flying off the shelf. This is an elderly woman who's very isolated. She meets a mouse, and the mouse brings all of these wonderful people into her life. It sounds hokey. It's not. It is a really terrific book. And for something a little darker, Bear by Julia Phillips, which has the whole fairy tale vibe. Two young sisters working so hard in a very tough existence on an island off the coast of Washington. It all changes when a bear comes to their neighborhood, and it drives the sisters apart. I also want to give a quick shout out to something that just came out in paperback, Crook Manifesto, Colson Whitehead. Love this book so much. If you want some mystery, some cops and robbers, some corruption, some great writing.
Gilbert Cruz, what do you have for us in fiction?
The first one is Swan Song. Ellen Hildebrand, she is a writer who puts a book out every summer. They're all about Nantucket. They all have drama. They all have romance. And somehow I have found myself reading one book of hers a summer for the past decade. I've only been to Nantucket for 2 hours on like the coldest day that I can recall. So I have no idea what it's like to be there in the summer, but I sort of do because I've read a dozen Ellen Hildebrand books. So I'm a big horror person. There's a book called Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. And there's some people who save their scary stuff until October, until the fall. I'm not that person. I like it all year round, and I think there are many people like me. This is about essentially an independent horror movie that was made years and years ago. A bunch of tragedies happened. It's become a cult film, and the only person left from the production has started to encounter some weird things. So that's Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. And then finally, another genre book, a fantasy, The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. If you've heard of Lev Grossman, it's because of his Magicians trilogy, which were a set of books that essentially imagined what if Harry Potter, but with older people and cursing and all the stuff that older teenagers get into. This new book imagines the days and the months after the death of King Arthur. So there have been many retellings of the King Arthur legend, books, movies, musicals. This one is sort of a sequel.
You went with all genre books for the summer. Okay, Anne, how about nonfiction?
Hanif Abdurraqib. There's always This Year, which is on basketball and ascension. This is a collection of essays about family and love and grief and fathers, but most importantly, it's all woven together through the lens of basketball. Hanif Abdurraqib is one of my favorite writers and just someone I learn from every time I read one of his books. Brilliant. My Black Country by Alice Randall, which is a journey through country music's Black past, present, and future. Alice is a fiction writer and a scholar. This is the story of all the people who have been erased in country music's past, and she is restoring them into the landscapes. Terrific book. And Consent by Jill Cement, a very slim little memoir. Jill Cement was 16 years old when she first kissed her art teacher, who was 46. They got married and they stayed together until he died at 86. And it is her looking back on her life and thinking, it was a happy marriage, but knowing what I know now, maybe there was something a little wrong about that. And a great book that just came out in paperback that could be read as a companion piece. My favorite, Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Didier. You've got a book club, read these two together. Terrific.
Gilbert Cruz, what are your choices for nonfiction?
Well, if I sort of went genre with my fiction choices, I'm also going to go a little pop culture with my nonfiction choices. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Future Was Now by Chris Nashawati. This is, I love movies, and I think for a lot of people my age who love movies, the summer of 1982, if you care about science fiction, fantasy, stuff like that, was one of the biggest summers of all time. So it had E.T., Poltergeist, Blade Runner, Tron, a Mad Max sequel, a Star Trek sequel, and this is essentially a history of that summer, a history of those movies. So I'm looking forward to reading that one. Another pop culture nonfiction book that's coming out later in June is called Cue the Sun, The Invention of Reality TV. This is by Emily Nussbaum. She's been a TV critic for many wonderful publications. And this is a history of modern reality TV. I don't watch reality TV. I never really have. And that means that I am out of the mainstream. And so, you know, from Cops to Survivor to The Bachelor to The Apprentice to Big Brother to Love is Blind, these are some of the most popular shows of the past several decades. And Emily Nussbaum does an amazing job of sort of sketching that whole history and what they're billing as sort of the first comprehensive history of this very important genre.
And you have a bookstore, you have a lot of young readers, and I know you wanted to give some choices for them.
Yeah, I never want to miss a chance to plug some great kids' books. Jarrett and Jerome Pumphrey, two of their classics have just come out in board books, so these are good for babies, for little kids. You can chew on them. The Old Truck, The Old Boat, beautiful, simple, terrific illustrations, great, clear story. If you have a slightly older kid, absolutely you want to buy a copy of Ahoy by Sophie Blackall. This is a book about imaginative play and how you can have a summer adventure no matter where you are or what you've got to work with. I adore this book and everything Sophie does. And America's favorite author for young people, Kate DiCamillo, has a new novel out called Ferris. It's about raccoons, chandeliers, S&H green stamps, grandmothers, love, and happiness. It's a story about a happy family. Call me crazy, my favorite.
Ann Patchett and Gilbert Cruz, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Before we go, we mentioned it last night, but it's worth repeating. We heard from some of you that your DVR recordings of the NewsHour have mysteriously stopped. We've ever so slightly renamed the program PBS NewsHour with a space between news and hour. as part of our recent rebranding on air and online. This change is throwing off some scheduled DVR recordings, so please do reset. Our apologies for the inconvenience, and thanks for your online feedback. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
A law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.